Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles in our lives. Sometimes when we think we have nothing left to give, that's exactly when we discover what we're truly made of. This is the story of Sarah Chun, a struggling nursing student who made a choice that seemed foolish to everyone around her, spending her very last dollar on lunch for a stranger. What she didn't know was that this single moment of compassion would not only change two lives forever, but would prove that love often finds us when we're not looking for it, and that the universe has a way of rewarding those who choose kindness over self-preservation. In a world where people walk past each other without making eye contact, where everyone seems too busy or too worried about their own problems to notice others in need, Sarah's story reminds us that genuine human connection still exists. It shows us that sometimes the person you help today might become the most important person in your life tomorrow. This is not just a love story. It's a testament to the power of seeing people for who they really are, beyond the surface, beyond circumstances, beyond what society tells us to notice. Get ready for a journey that will restore your faith in humanity and remind you that real love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who makes your imperfect world feel complete. Sarah Chun stared at the crumpled $5 bill in her palm, knowing it was all that stood between her and complete financial disaster. The fluorescent lights in the hospital cafeteria buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her tired face. She had been awake for 36 hours straight, cramming for her nursing finals while working double shifts at the local diner to make ends meet. The weight of exhaustion pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy blanket she couldn't shake off. Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. The vending machine sandwich she was eyeing cost exactly $5, her last $5 until her next paycheck, which was still 4 days away. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to calculate her options. She could buy the sandwich and survive until tomorrow, then figure out how to stretch her remaining energy until payday. Or she could save the money for bus fare to get to her final exam tomorrow morning. Walking the 8 miles to the university wasn't impossible, but after the shifts she had been pulling, she wasn't sure her legs would carry her that far. The nursing program had been her dream since childhood. Growing up in a small apartment above her grandmother's laundromat, she had watched her grandmother work 16-hour days to support them both after Sarah's parents died in a car accident when she was 12. Her grandmother, who spoke broken English and cleaned office buildings at night, had always told her that education was the one thing no one could take away from her. "Study hard, little bird," her grandmother would say in her thick accent, using the pet name she had given Sarah years ago. "Make something beautiful of this life." Now, at 24, Sarah was in her final semester of nursing school. She had made it this far through a combination of academic scholarships, student loans that would take decades to pay off, and working every job she could find. She cleaned houses on weekends, babysat for professors' children, and had spent the last 2 years serving tables at Murphy's Diner, where the owner, Mrs. Murphy, had become like a second grandmother to her. Mrs. Murphy was the only person who knew how desperate Sarah's financial situation had become. The older woman had offered to lend her money countless times, but Sarah's pride wouldn't let her accept it. She had already taken so much help from so many people over the years. Her grandmother had sacrificed everything to raise her. Her professors had given her extra opportunities to earn money through research assistants, and Mrs. Murphy had already bent over backward to accommodate her crazy schedule. Sarah opened her eyes and looked around the cafeteria. It was the lunch rush, and the place was packed with doctors, nurses, residents, and medical students. Everyone seemed to belong here except her. Even though she was just months away from graduating, she still felt like an outsider looking in. Most of her classmates came from families who could afford to support them through school. They worried about grades and clinical rotations, not about whether they could afford to eat or keep the electricity on in their apartments. She had learned to hide her struggles well. Her scrubs were always clean and pressed, even though she only owned 2 sets and had to wash them by hand in her tiny bathroom sink most nights. Her notebooks were filled with careful notes written in the margins of textbooks she had bought used and would sell back the moment her finals were over. She participated in study groups and clinical discussions as if she had the same opportunities as everyone else. But The truth was that while her classmates went home to comfortable apartments and supportive families, Sarah went home to a studio apartment with a leaky ceiling and walls so thin she could hear every argument the neighbors had. She studied by candlelight when the electricity was turned off, and she had perfected the art of making a single can of soup last for 2 meals. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was training to take care of other people while barely managing to take care of herself. Every day in her clinical rotations, she saw patients who were struggling with their own challenges, financial, emotional, physical. She connected with them in a way that sometimes surprised her supervising nurses. She understood what it felt like to worry about money while trying to focus on getting better. She knew what it was like to feel invisible and forgotten by a system that was supposed to help. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She pulled it out, hoping it might be Mrs. Murphy offering her an extra shift, but instead it was her landlord. The rent was 3 days late, and he was giving her until Friday to pay or he would start eviction proceedings. She closed her eyes and felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with anxiety about money. $5. That's what her entire immediate future had come down to. She could buy food and walk to her exam, hoping her exhausted body could carry her 8 miles. Or she could save the money for bus fare and show up to her final exam hungry, but at least present. Either choice felt like giving up something essential. As she sat there trying to decide, she noticed a commotion near the entrance of the cafeteria. An elderly black man was standing near the register, patting down his pockets with increasing urgency. He was wearing a hospital gown over pajama pants and slippers, with a plastic bracelet on his wrist that marked him as a patient. His shoulders were stooped with age, and his hands shook slightly as he searched through a small bag he was carrying. The cashier, a young woman with dyed blonde hair and an impatient expression, was tapping her fingers on the counter. Behind the elderly man, a line of hungry hospital staff was forming, and Sarah could see people checking their watches and sighing with frustration. "Sir, I need you to either pay or move aside so other customers can order," the cashier said loudly, her voice carrying across the cafeteria. The man looked up with embarrassed confusion in his eyes. "I'm sorry, miss. I was sure I had my wallet with me. My daughter must have taken it home with my other clothes. I haven't eaten since yesterday, and the nurse said I needed to get some food before my next treatment." Sarah found herself leaning forward, straining to hear the conversation. There was something about the man's voice that reminded her of her own grandfather, who had died when she was young. He had the same gentle tone, the same way of speaking that suggested a lifetime of treating others with kindness even when life hadn't always returned the favor. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't give you food without payment," the cashier said, her voice getting louder. "Hospital policy." A few people in line behind the man started to grumble. Someone muttered something about holding up the line, and Sarah saw the man's shoulders shrink even more. He looked around the cafeteria as if hoping someone might step forward to help, but everyone seemed to be deliberately avoiding eye contact. "Maybe I could call my daughter," the man said quietly. "She works downtown, but perhaps she could come back with some money." The cashier rolled her eyes. "Sir, this is the lunch rush. I really need you to step aside." Sarah watched as the man shuffled to the side, still clutching his empty bag. He sat down at a nearby table and pulled out an old flip phone, the kind that Sarah remembered her grandmother using years before smartphones became common. His hands shook as he tried to dial, and she could see from his expression that he wasn't getting an answer. Around him, the normal chaos of the cafeteria continued. Doctors discussed cases while eating salads. Nurses grabbed quick sandwiches between shifts, and residents chugged coffee to stay awake. Everyone was focused on their own problems, their own needs, their own busy lives. The elderly man might as well have been invisible. Sarah looked down at her $5 bill again. The logical part of her brain, the part that had been trained by years of financial struggle, told her to buy her own sandwich and worry about her own problems. She had an exam tomorrow that could determine whether she graduated on time or had to repeat the semester, which would mean more student loans and more months of barely surviving. But as she watched the man try his phone again with trembling fingers, something deeper than logic began to stir in her chest. It was the same feeling she had experienced during her grandmother's funeral, when neighbors who barely had enough food for their own families had shown up with casseroles and homemade bread. It was the feeling she had when Mrs. Murphy would slip an extra piece of pie onto her plate at the diner without charging for it. It was the understanding that sometimes being human meant choosing connection over self-preservation. Sarah stood up from her table, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. She walked over to where the man was sitting, still trying to reach his daughter on the phone. Up close, she could see that he was probably in his 70s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and gray hair that looked like it had been carefully combed despite his hospital stay. "Excuse me," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. "I couldn't help but overhear what happened at the register." The man looked up at her with a mixture of hope and wariness. "Yes, miss. I seem to have misplaced my wallet. I was hoping to reach my daughter, but she must be in a meeting at work." Sarah sat down across from him, her heart beating faster than it had during any exam she had ever taken. "What were you planning to order?" "Oh, nothing fancy," he said with a tired smile. "Maybe just a sandwich and some soup. Something warm. The food in my room isn't very appealing, and the nurse said I should try to eat something before my chemotherapy session this afternoon." The word chemotherapy hit Sarah like a physical blow. This man wasn't just hungry. He was fighting for his life, and he couldn't even afford a meal to help him get through his treatment. She thought about her grandmother, who had died of cancer when Sarah was in high school. She remembered how the treatments had made eating difficult, how important it had been to find foods that would stay down and provide some nutrition. "What's your name?" she asked. "Robert," he said. "Robert Washington." "And you are?" "Sarah Chun. I'm a nursing student here." Robert's face brightened slightly. "A nurse? That's wonderful. We need more good nurses in this world. I can tell just by talking to you that you're going to be one of the good ones." Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Here was this man, sitting alone and hungry in a hospital cafeteria, facing cancer treatment without enough money for lunch, and he was taking the time to encourage a stranger. She thought about all the reasons she should walk away: her own hunger, her upcoming exam, her rent that was already late, her complete lack of financial security. Then, she thought about her grandmother's voice. "Make something beautiful of this life." Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out her $5 bill. She placed it on the table between them, her hand trembling slightly. "Mr. Washington," she said, "I would be honored if you would let me buy your lunch today." Robert stared at the money for a long moment, then looked up at her with confusion. "Oh, miss, that's very kind of you. But I couldn't possibly accept money from a student. You need that for yourself." Sarah shook her head. "Actually, I think you need it more than I do right now. Please, it would make me feel good to know you had a warm meal before your treatment." "But surely you need to eat too," Robert said, his voice full of concern. "You look tired, dear. You should take care of yourself." Sarah smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it felt genuine. "My grandmother always told me that taking care of others is the same thing as taking care of yourself. Besides, nursing school has taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is make sure someone else feels less alone." Robert's eyes filled with tears. "Your grandmother sounds like a very wise woman." "She was," Sarah said. "She would have liked you, I think." After a moment of hesitation, Robert picked up the $5 bill. "I don't know how to thank you, Sarah. This is incredibly generous." "Just promise me you'll get something that tastes good," Sarah said. "And maybe something with protein to help you stay strong for your treatment." Robert stood up slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. "I promise. And I promise I'll find a way to pay you back." Sarah waved her hand. "No need. Really." As she watched Robert walk back to the register, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. The anxiety about her exam and her rent didn't disappear, but it felt smaller somehow, less overwhelming. She had made a choice based on who she wanted to be rather than what she was afraid of losing, and that felt like the most important kind of success. She gathered her things and prepared to walk the 8 miles to campus for her exam, already planning how she would pace herself to arrive on time. As she headed toward the exit, she heard someone call her name. "Miss Chun." She turned to see Robert approaching with a tray of food, a turkey sandwich, a cup of soup, and an apple. "I got the sandwich and soup like you suggested," he said. "But I realized I still have change left over, and I was wondering if maybe you'd join me for lunch. It doesn't seem right to eat alone when the person who made this meal possible is probably hungry too." Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but Robert held up a gentle hand. "Please," he said, "I may not be able to pay you back with money right now, but I can share what you've given me. Besides, you look like you could use a friend, and I know I could." Sarah looked at this kind stranger who was offering to share a meal that Marcus Washington pushed through the hospital doors with the kind of urgency that comes from receiving a phone call that changes everything. His father's voice had been weak on the phone that morning, admitting that the cancer treatments were taking more out of him than he had expected. Marcus had immediately canceled his afternoon meetings at the law firm where he worked as a corporate attorney and driven straight to the hospital. At 32, Marcus had built a successful career representing major companies in complex litigation. He was the kind of lawyer who worked 80-hour weeks, who had a reputation for being brilliant and ruthless in equal measure, and who had sacrificed most of his personal relationships for professional success. His corner office downtown was filled with awards and commendations, but his apartment felt empty, and his phone rarely rang with social calls. The irony wasn't lost on him that he had spent years building a career designed to give his family security, only to realize that he had missed so much time with the father who had sacrificed everything to make his education possible. Robert Washington had worked 3 jobs to put Marcus through college and law school: janitor at the local high school during the day, security guard at a warehouse on weekends, and part-time handyman whenever anyone in the neighborhood needed help. Marcus had memories of falling asleep to the sound of his father's work boots on the front steps at midnight, coming home from his 3rd job of the day. He remembered his father sitting at the kitchen table, still in his work clothes, helping him with homework even though Robert had never finished high school himself. When Marcus had been accepted to Harvard Law School, his father had cried with joy and pride, never mentioning that it would mean taking out a second mortgage on their small house to help cover expenses. Now Robert was fighting cancer, and Marcus felt like he was making up for lost time. He had been coming to the hospital every day for the past 2 weeks, trying to be present in a way he hadn't been for years. The guilt of his absence weighed on him heavily, especially as he watched his father face treatments with the same quiet dignity he had shown through every challenge in his life. As Marcus walked through the hospital corridors toward his father's room, his phone buzzed with emails from work. He had 3 major cases pending, a deposition scheduled for tomorrow that he would have to reschedule, and a client who had been calling all morning demanding updates. But for the first time in his career, work felt secondary to something more important. When he reached his father's room, it was empty. The bed was made, and his father's few belongings were still there: a worn paperback book, reading glasses, and the small bag of personal items that Marcus had helped him pack when he was admitted. Marcus felt a moment of panic before remembering that his father often went for walks around the hospital when he was feeling restless. Marcus decided to check the cafeteria, knowing that his father liked to sit there sometimes and watch the busy activity of the hospital staff. As he walked toward the elevators, he thought about the conversation they had had the night before. His father had talked about feeling like a burden, about worrying that Marcus was sacrificing too much time at work to be at the hospital. "Son," Robert had said, "I don't want you to put your life on hold for me. I know how hard you've worked to build your career." Marcus had wanted to tell his father that his career suddenly felt less important than these conversations, that he was starting to understand what his father had been trying to teach him all those years, that success meant nothing if you didn't have people to share it with. But the words had felt too big, too emotional for the careful way they usually communicated. The elevator doors opened on the cafeteria level, and Marcus stepped out into the familiar chaos of the lunch rush. He scanned the room quickly, looking for his father's familiar figure. The cafeteria was packed with the usual mix of medical staff, patients, and visitors, all focused on their own urgent needs and conversations. Then he spotted him. Robert was sitting at a table near the window, and he wasn't alone. Across from him sat a young Asian woman with long black hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was wearing scrubs and looked tired, but she was listening intently to whatever his father was saying, occasionally laughing at something that made her eyes light up. Marcus felt a strange mix of emotions as he watched them: relief that his father wasn't alone, curiosity about who the woman was, and something that might have been protectiveness. His father had always been friendly and trusting, sometimes to a fault. Marcus had inherited a more cautious nature, probably from years of dealing with people who wanted something from him because of his success. As he approached their table, he could hear pieces of their conversation. His father was telling a story about his work as a school janitor, about a student who had been struggling in class, and how he had helped the boy find a quiet place to study after school. The woman was listening with the kind of attention that suggested she genuinely cared about what he was saying. "Dad," Marcus said as he reached their table. Both Robert and the woman looked up, and Marcus found himself making direct eye contact with the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Her eyes were dark brown with flecks of gold, and even though she looked exhausted, there was something warm and intelligent in her expression that made him momentarily forget what he had been planning to say. "Marcus," Robert's face lit up with joy. "I wasn't expecting you until this evening. Sarah, I'd like you to meet my son, Marcus." "Marcus, this is Sarah Chun, the wonderful nursing student I was telling you about." Sarah stood up to shake his hand, and Marcus noticed that she moved with a slight stiffness that suggested she was running on very little sleep. Her handshake was firm but brief, and when she smiled, he felt something shift inside his chest that he didn't quite recognize. "It's nice to meet you, Marcus," Sarah said. "Your father has been telling me about your work as a lawyer. He's very proud of you." Marcus looked at his father, who was beaming with the kind of pride that made him feel simultaneously grateful and unworthy. "Thank you. Dad's told me about you too." This was a lie. His father hadn't mentioned Sarah at all. But Marcus found himself wanting to know more about this woman who had somehow managed to get his usually reserved father talking and laughing during what should have been a difficult day. "Sarah bought me lunch today," Robert said, his voice full of warmth. "When I couldn't find my wallet, she stepped right up and insisted on helping. Then she joined me for the meal, and we've been having the most wonderful conversation." Marcus looked at Sarah with new interest. "That was very kind of you." Sarah shook her head, looking slightly embarrassed. "It wasn't a big deal. Your father was telling me about his treatment schedule, and I just thought he could use a friend." Something in the way she said it made Marcus suspect there was more to the story. He had learned to read people carefully in his work, and there was something about Sarah's body language that suggested this act of generosity might have cost her more than she was letting on. Her clothes were clean but worn, and he noticed that she hadn't eaten anything herself despite joining his father for lunch. "Well, I'm grateful you were here," Marcus said. "I was worried about him being alone during the day." "Oh, I've been fine," Robert said quickly. "Sarah and I have been talking about her nursing program. She's in her final semester, and she's going to make an excellent nurse. She has that special quality that you can't teach. She really cares about people." Marcus watched Sarah's cheeks redden at the compliment, and he found himself wondering what her story was. There was something about her that reminded him of his father, a kind of quiet strength that suggested she had faced challenges and found ways to overcome them. "What area of nursing are you planning to go into?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. "I'm hoping to work in oncology," Sarah said. "Cancer patients and their families are going through some of the hardest experiences of their lives, and I want to be able to help them navigate that with as much dignity and comfort as possible." Marcus felt something tighten in his throat. His father was an oncology patient, and he had seen how much difference the right nurse could make in terms of both medical care and emotional support. The thought that Sarah was training to help people like his father made him look at her with new respect. "That's important work," he said. "The nurses here have been amazing with my dad." "The nurses have been wonderful," Robert agreed. "But Sarah here has a special gift. We've only been talking for an hour, but I feel like I've known her for years." Marcus looked at his father, who was more animated than he had been in weeks. Whatever Sarah had done, whatever they had talked about, it had clearly lifted his spirits in a way that Marcus's daily visits hadn't been able to accomplish. He felt a combination of gratitude and something that might have been envy that this stranger had been able to connect with his father in a way that felt natural and easy. "I should probably let you two continue your visit," Sarah said, starting to gather her things. "I have an exam to get to." "How are you getting there?" Robert asked with the concern of someone who had been listening carefully to her earlier conversation. Sarah hesitated for just a moment. "I'll walk. It's not that far." Marcus caught the slight hesitation and the way his father frowned with worry. "Where do you need to go?" he found himself asking. "The university campus," Sarah said. "But really it's fine. I walk there sometimes anyway. Marcus knew the university campus. It was at least 8 miles from the hospital, through neighborhoods that weren't particularly safe for a young woman walking alone. The idea of Sarah walking that distance after what had clearly been a long day made him uncomfortable. I could give you a ride, he offered. I was just about to head back downtown anyway, and the campus is on the way. Sarah looked surprised. That's very kind of you, but I couldn't impose. You came here to visit your father. Nonsense, Robert said firmly. Marcus, you should definitely give Sarah a ride. She's been so kind to me today, and it would make me feel better knowing she got to her exam safely. Marcus could see Sarah weighing the offer, clearly torn between accepting help and maintaining her independence. He recognized the struggle because he had felt it himself many times, the difficulty of accepting assistance when you were used to handling everything on your own. Really, it's no trouble, Marcus said. I'd feel better knowing you got there safely, especially after what you did for my dad today. Finally, Sarah nodded. Thank you. That's very generous. As they prepared to leave, Robert grabbed Sarah's hand. Thank you again for lunch and for the conversation. You've made a difficult day so much brighter. Thank you for sharing your stories with me, Sarah replied. I'll be thinking of you during your treatment this afternoon. You're stronger than you know. Marcus watched this exchange with growing curiosity about Sarah Chun. There was something about the way she interacted with his father, genuine warmth without pity, respect without condescension, that spoke to a maturity and emotional intelligence that impressed him. Most people, when they learned about his father's cancer, either avoided the topic entirely or spoke about it with the kind of forced optimism that felt more like denial. As they walked toward the elevator, Marcus found himself stealing glances at Sarah. She moved with purpose despite her obvious exhaustion, and there was something about her presence that made him feel more grounded than he had in months. His usual anxiety about work deadlines and client demands seemed to fade into the background. So how long have you been in nursing school? He asked as they waited for the elevator. For years, Sarah said. This is my final semester. I graduate in 6 weeks if everything goes according to plan. That's exciting. Do you have a job lined up? Sarah paused. I'm still interviewing. The job market is pretty competitive, but I'm hopeful something will work out. Marcus heard something in her tone that suggested the job search might be more urgent than she was letting on. As someone who had struggled financially through school himself, he recognized the careful way she was discussing her future, optimistic but realistic about the challenges ahead. The drive to campus stretched longer than either of them had expected due to unexpected traffic, and what should have been a 20-minute journey turned into nearly an hour of conversation that neither wanted to end. Sarah found herself talking more openly than she usually did with strangers, something about Marcus's genuine questions and patient listening making her feel comfortable sharing pieces of her story. So you're originally from here? Marcus asked as they sat in traffic on Fifth Avenue. Born and raised, Sarah said. My grandmother immigrated here from Taiwan when she was young, and she raised me after my parents died. She always said this city had given our family a chance at a better life, so I wanted to stay and give back to the community that supported us. Marcus glanced at her profile as she spoke, noting the way her voice softened when she talked about her grandmother. That's a beautiful way to think about it. What made you choose nursing specifically? Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching the pedestrians cross the street outside the car window. When my grandmother was sick, before she died, I spent a lot of time in hospitals. I saw how much difference the right nurse could make, not just medically, but emotionally. There was one nurse, Maria, who worked the night shift on my grandmother's floor. She would sit with my grandmother when I couldn't be there, and she would call me if anything changed, even small things. She paused, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her backpack. Maria never made me feel like I was in the way or asking too many questions. She explained everything that was happening and helped me understand how to advocate for my grandmother's care. When my grandmother died, Maria held my hand and cried with me. I knew then that I wanted to be that person for other families. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest as he listened. His own experience with his father's illness had shown him how vulnerable families became in medical settings, how much they needed advocates and allies who understood both the medical and emotional aspects of care. Your grandmother would be proud of what you're doing. I hope so, Sarah said softly. She sacrificed so much to make sure I had opportunities she never had. Sometimes I feel like I'm carrying all of her dreams along with my own. The weight of that responsibility was something Marcus understood intimately. His father had worked multiple jobs and sacrificed his own comfort to make Marcus's education possible. The pressure to succeed hadn't just been about personal ambition. It had been about honoring his father's investment and proving that the sacrifices had been worth it. That's a heavy burden, Marcus said. But from what I saw with my father today, you're already making her proud. Sarah turned to look at him, studying his face with curious eyes. What about you? Did you always want to be a lawyer? Marcus laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. Honestly, I wanted to be a teacher when I was younger. I loved learning, and I thought it would be amazing to help kids discover subjects they were passionate about. But teaching doesn't pay enough to support a family or help aging parents, so I went with law instead. Do you regret it? Sarah asked quietly. The question caught Marcus off guard. Most people assumed that his success meant he was happy with his choices. I used to think I didn't, he said slowly. I told myself that financial security was more important than personal fulfillment, that I could find satisfaction in being good at something even if it wasn't my first passion. But lately, especially since my dad got sick, I've been questioning whether I've been living my life or just managing it. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes as traffic began to move again. Sarah was processing the unexpected depth of their conversation, surprised by Marcus's honesty. Most successful people she had met were either defensive about their choices or completely convinced they had made the right decisions. Marcus's willingness to question his own path suggested a thoughtfulness that she found attractive. Your father seems incredibly proud of you, Sarah said finally. He talked about your achievements with such joy. Even if the career path wasn't what you originally planned, you've clearly made a positive impact. Maybe, Marcus said, but I'm starting to think impact isn't just about what you accomplish professionally. It's about how you show up for the people who matter to you. And I haven't been showing up for my dad the way I should have. Sarah recognized the guilt in his voice because she had felt it herself many times. You're showing up now, she said. That's what matters. As they finally reached the university campus, Marcus realized he didn't want their conversation to end. Sarah had a final exam to take, and he had work responsibilities waiting for him. But something about their connection felt important in a way he couldn't quite name. What time does your exam finish? He asked as he pulled up to the nursing building. Probably around 6 o'clock, Sarah said, gathering her backpack. It's a comprehensive final, so it's going to be intense. Marcus checked his watch. It was already 3:30, which meant Sarah had barely enough time to review her notes before the exam started. Good luck, he said. I know you'll do great. Sarah paused with her hand on the door handle. Thank you for the ride. And thank you for sharing your stories about your father. He's lucky to have you. We're both lucky to have met you today, Marcus replied. As Sarah walked toward the building, Marcus found himself wanting to wait to make sure she made it inside safely, even though it was unnecessary. There was something about her that made him feel protective, not in a condescending way, but in the way you feel protective of something precious and rare. He drove back to his office downtown, but for the first time in years, his mind wasn't on work. Instead, he found himself thinking about Sarah's story, about her grandmother who had sacrificed everything for her education, about the choice she had made to spend her last $5 on lunch for a stranger. There was something about her combination of strength and vulnerability that challenged everything he thought he knew about success and happiness. That evening, Marcus returned to the hospital to check on his father. Robert was resting after his chemotherapy treatment, but his spirits seemed higher than they had been in weeks. How was your afternoon? Marcus asked, settling into the chair beside his father's bed. Much better than I expected, Robert said with a weak but genuine smile. The treatment was rough, but I kept thinking about my conversation with Sarah this morning. She has such a positive way of looking at life, even when things are difficult. Marcus nodded, understanding exactly what his father meant. She seems special. How did you two start talking? Robert's expression grew thoughtful. Well, that's quite a story, actually. I had forgotten my wallet and couldn't pay for lunch. I was embarrassed and worried about holding up the line. Most people were avoiding eye contact, probably hoping someone else would deal with the situation. He paused, his voice growing softer. But Sarah came over and sat with me. She didn't just offer to help. She made me feel like helping me was something she wanted to do, not something she had to do. Then, she insisted on sharing the meal with me. And we ended up talking for over an hour about everything from her nursing program to stories about my work at the school. Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest as he listened to his father recount the details of their meeting. Good, Robert said firmly. I was worried about her walking that far. She's clearly working very hard to get through school, and she shouldn't have to worry about her safety on top of everything else. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. A nurse came in to check Robert's vital signs and adjust his for medication. As Marcus watched the professional and compassionate way the nurse interacted with his father, he found himself thinking about Sarah's career choice again. She was training to provide this kind of care, this combination of medical expertise and human kindness that made such a difference during vulnerable times. After the nurse left, Robert settled back into his pillows with a contemplative expression. You know, son, talking with Sarah today reminded me of something I had forgotten. What's that? When you were in law school, you used to call me every week and tell me about your classes. You were so excited about constitutional law and civil rights cases. You had this passion in your voice when you talked about using the law to help people who couldn't help themselves. Marcus felt a pang of recognition and loss. He remembered those phone calls, remembered the excitement he had felt about the potential for his career to make a meaningful difference in people's lives. Somewhere along the way, that idealism had been replaced by pragmatism and financial goals. I remember, he said quietly. I've been proud of your success, Robert continued. But I've also worried that you might have lost that sense of purpose that used to drive you. Today, watching you with Sarah and seeing how you responded to her kindness toward me, I saw glimpses of that passionate young man again. Marcus sat with his father's words, feeling something shift inside his chest. For years, he had been measuring his worth by external markers, salary, cases won, recognition from partners at his firm. But his father's illness and his encounter with Sarah had reminded him of different kinds of value: presence, compassion, genuine human connection. Maybe I have lost touch with that part of myself, Marcus admitted. It's not lost, Robert said gently. It's just been buried under other priorities. But it's still there. I saw it today. They talked for another hour before Marcus left for the evening. As he drove home to his empty apartment, he found himself thinking about the contrast between his life and Sarah's. His apartment was beautiful and expensive, filled with furniture and artwork that reflected his professional success. But it felt sterile compared to the warmth and authenticity that Sarah seemed to carry with her everywhere. The next morning, Marcus found himself checking his phone frequently, wondering how Sarah's exam had gone. He realized he didn't have her contact information, and the only way he might see her again would be if she visited his father at the hospital. The thought that their paths might not cross again bothered him more than it should have. Around noon, he decided to take an extended lunch break and visit his father earlier than usual. When he arrived at the hospital, he found Robert sitting up in bed reading, looking more alert than he had in days. You're looking better today, Marcus said, genuinely pleased to see the improvement. I feel better, Robert replied. I think having something to look forward to helped me get through yesterday's treatment. Something to look forward to? Robert smiled. Sarah stopped by this morning before her clinical rotation. She wanted to check on me and tell me how her exam went. She thinks she did well, though she was modest about it. Marcus felt his heart rate quicken. She was here this morning? For about 20 minutes. She brought me a cup of coffee from the good coffee shop down the street. Said she remembered that I mentioned the hospital coffee wasn't very appealing. We talked about her rotation schedule and her job interviews. She's hoping to get hired here at the hospital after graduation. Marcus found himself hoping the same thing, which surprised him with its intensity. The thought of Sarah working in the same building where his father was receiving treatment felt like a sign that their paths were meant to continue intersecting. Did she mention anything else? Marcus asked, trying to sound casual. Robert studied his son's face with the kind of knowing look that fathers perfect over decades of watching their children try to hide their feelings. She asked how you were doing. I got the impression she enjoyed your conversation yesterday. Marcus felt something warm and hopeful spread through his chest. Really, son, Robert said gently. When was the last time you met someone who made you want to be a better version of yourself? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication, and POS 3 weeks passed before Marcus saw Sarah again, though she remained constantly in his thoughts. He had hoped she might visit his father during her clinical rotations, but their schedules never seemed to align. Robert mentioned her in passing. She had sent a card wishing him well with his treatments, and she had asked the nursing staff to give him updates on his progress. But Marcus began to worry that he might never have another chance to talk with her. During those weeks, Marcus found himself changing in ways that surprised him. He started leaving work earlier to spend more time with his father. He declined several after-hours networking events that would have been important for his career. Most significantly, he began questioning whether the path he had chosen was really the one he wanted to continue walking. The transformation didn't go unnoticed at his law firm. During a partners' meeting, his supervisor commented on his recent lack of availability for overtime work and high-profile cases. Marcus found himself responding with a directness that shocked everyone in the room, including himself. "I'm realizing that there are more important things than billable hours," he said calmly. "My father is fighting cancer, and I want to be present for him in a way I haven't been before." The room fell silent. In the competitive world of corporate law, such statements were usually career suicide. But Marcus discovered that he cared less about the partnership track than he had thought. The conversation with Sarah about finding meaning in work had planted seeds of doubt that were now growing into certainty that something needed to change. Meanwhile, Sarah was facing her own challenges. Despite her confidence about the final exam, the results had been delayed due to administrative issues with the testing company. The uncertainty about graduation was causing anxiety that affected every aspect of her life. Her job interviews weren't going as well as she had hoped, partly because several potential employers wanted to wait until they were certain she would graduate on schedule. The financial pressure was becoming overwhelming. Her rent was now a month behind, and her landlord had started eviction proceedings. She had picked up extra shifts at the diner, but Mrs. Murphy was cutting hours due to a slow winter season. Sarah found herself eating one meal a day and walking everywhere to save money on transportation. Despite her struggles, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Robert Washington and his son Marcus. She had been moved by Robert's resilience and grace in the face of serious illness, and their conversation had reminded her why she had chosen nursing in the first place. But it was Marcus who occupied her thoughts during quiet moments. Their conversation in the car had revealed a depth and thoughtfulness that she found attractive, and his obvious love for his father showed a side of him that contrasted beautifully with his professional success. The opportunity to see Marcus again came unexpectedly. Sarah was working a clinical rotation in the oncology ward when she heard a familiar voice coming from one of the patient rooms. She looked through the doorway and saw Robert Washington sitting up in bed, engaged in animated conversation with Marcus, who was sitting in the visitor's chair looking more relaxed than she remembered. Sarah debated whether to interrupt their visit, but Robert spotted her in the hallway and called out enthusiastically, "Sarah, come in, please. Marcus was just telling me about a case he's working on that I think you'd find interesting." Sarah entered the room tentatively, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. She had been working for 10 hours straight and knew she looked tired. But Marcus stood up immediately when he saw her, his face breaking into a genuine smile that made her heart skip slightly. "Sarah, it's so good to see you," Marcus said warmly. "Dad's been telling me that you've been checking on him." "Thank you for that." "Of course," Sarah replied, moving to check Robert's chart. "How are you feeling today, Mr. Washington?" "Much better, thanks to you and the excellent staff here," Robert said. "The treatment seems to be working, and my energy levels are improving." Sarah reviewed his recent test results and vital signs, pleased to see that Robert was indeed responding well to the chemotherapy. As she updated his chart, she could feel Marcus watching her work, and it made her more aware of every movement and decision. "You're very thorough," Marcus observed as Sarah finished her documentation. "Attention to detail can literally be a matter of life and death in this field," Sarah said. "I've learned not to take any shortcuts." "That's exactly the kind of nurse I want taking care of my father," Marcus said, and there was something in his tone that made Sarah look up at him more carefully. Robert, who had been observing this exchange with growing interest, decided to take matters into his own hands. "You know, I'm getting tired, and I think I'm going to rest for a while. Marcus, why don't you walk Sarah to wherever she needs to go? I worry about her working such long shifts and getting home safely. Both Sarah and Marcus started to protest, but Robert had already closed his eyes and was making exaggerated snoring sounds that made it clear he wasn't actually sleeping but was determined to give them time alone together. He's not very subtle, is he? Marcus said with a laugh as they left the room. I think he means well, Sarah replied, though she was grateful for Robert's intervention. She had been hoping for a chance to talk with Marcus alone, but hadn't known how to create the opportunity. Can I buy you a coffee? Marcus asked as they walked toward the elevators. You look like you could use a break. Sarah hesitated. Her shift wasn't technically over for another hour, but she was ahead on her patient care tasks and could probably spare 20 minutes. I would like that, she said. They made their way to the hospital's small coffee shop, which was nearly empty in the late afternoon. Marcus insisted on paying for Sarah's latte and a sandwich, despite her protests that she wasn't hungry. He had noticed that she looked thinner than she had 3 weeks ago, and he suspected she might not be eating regularly. How did your exam results turn out? Marcus asked as they sat down at a small table by the window. Still waiting to hear, Sarah said, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup for warmth. There was some kind of technical issue with the testing company. They say we should know by the end of next week. Marcus could see the stress in her eyes. That must be frustrating, especially when you're trying to plan for after graduation. It's been challenging, Sarah admitted. A lot of the job opportunities one was pursuing have been put on hold until employers know for certain that I'll be graduating on time. Marcus heard what she wasn't saying, that she was probably struggling financially while waiting for her future to be resolved. Is there anything I can do to help? I know some people in healthcare administration, and I might be able to make some calls. Sarah shook her head quickly. Thank you, but I need to handle this on my own. I've always figured things out eventually. Marcus recognized the pride in her response because he had felt it himself many times. I understand that. But sometimes accepting help isn't about weakness. It's about recognizing that other people care about your success. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both processing the implications of what Marcus had just said. Sarah was surprised by his offer to help and by the genuine concern she saw in his eyes. Marcus was realizing that his desire to help Sarah went beyond simple gratitude for her kindness to his father. Can I ask you something? Sarah said finally. Of course. That day we met, your father mentioned that you were questioning some of your career choices. Have you figured anything out? Marcus was surprised that she remembered such a personal detail from their conversation. Actually, yes. I've been doing a lot of thinking over the past few weeks. Spending more time with my dad, seeing what really matters when someone is facing a serious illness. It's made me reconsider what I want my life to look like. What kinds of changes are you thinking about? Marcus hesitated. He hadn't discussed his evolving thoughts with anyone except his father, and even those conversations had been tentative. I'm thinking about transitioning from corporate law to something more focused on helping people. Maybe medical advocacy, or working with families who are navigating the healthcare system. I've realized that I went into law because I wanted to help people, but somehow I ended up helping corporations instead. Sarah leaned forward, clearly interested. That sounds like it would be a significant change. It would mean less money, less prestige, probably starting over to some extent, Marcus said. But I keep thinking about what you said about finding meaning in your work. I haven't felt passionate about what I do in years, and I don't want to wake up at 60 realizing I spent my entire career on things that didn't matter to me. Your father would be proud of you for thinking this way, Sarah said softly. He's already proud, which is part of what's giving me the courage to consider making changes. He worked so hard to give me opportunities, and I think he'd be happy to see me use those opportunities in a way that feels authentic to who I am. They talked for another hour, their conversation ranging from career aspirations to family stories to their shared observations about the healthcare system. Sarah found herself opening up about her financial struggles and her fears about the delayed exam results. Marcus shared his growing desire to find work that felt meaningful rather than just profitable. As the conversation deepened, both of them became aware that something significant was happening between them. This wasn't just friendly conversation. There was a mutual attraction and understanding that felt rare and precious. Sarah had never met someone who listened so carefully to what she was saying, who asked thoughtful follow-up questions, and remembered details from previous conversations. Marcus had never felt so comfortable being honest about his doubts and dreams with someone he had known for such a short time. When Sarah finally had to return to her shift, Marcus walked her back to the oncology ward. At the elevator, they stood facing each other, both reluctant to end their time together. "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" Marcus asked, his heart beating faster than it had during any court appearance. "I mean, when your schedule allows. I know you're working incredibly hard right now." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had been hoping he would ask, but she was also acutely aware of the differences in their circumstances. "I'd like that," she said, "but I should probably wait until I hear about my exam results. I'm not great company when I'm stressed about major life decisions." "I understand," Marcus said, "but for what it's worth, I think you're excellent company regardless of what else is going on in your life." The sincerity in his voice made Sarah's cheeks flush. "Thank you. That means more than you know." As the elevator doors opened, Sarah impulsively reached out and touched Marcus's arm. "Take care of yourself, okay? Your father needs you to be healthy and present, not just constantly worried about him." Marcus nodded, touched by her concern. "I will." "And Sarah? Everything is going to work out with your exam results. I can tell you're going to be an amazing nurse." As Sarah rode the elevator back to her floor, she realized that her feelings for Marcus Washington were becoming deeper and more complicated than she had expected. She was attracted to him physically, but more than that, she was drawn to his kindness, his thoughtfulness, and his willingness to question his own assumptions about success and happiness. The challenge would be navigating the significant differences. 2 months later, Sarah stood in the hospital employee parking lot holding her nursing license and a job offer from the oncology department where she had completed her clinical rotations. After weeks of uncertainty, everything had fallen into place in a matter of days. Her exam results had finally been released. She had scored in the top 5% of all test takers, and her graduation ceremony was scheduled for the following week. The job offer had come as a surprise. The hiring manager had specifically mentioned Sarah's interaction with patients' families and her ability to provide both medical care and emotional support. Unknown to Sarah, Robert Washington had written a letter to the department head describing the exceptional care and kindness she had shown him during his treatment, and that letter had been shared with the hiring committee. As Sarah walked through the hospital corridors on her way to accept the position formally, she found herself thinking about how much her life had changed since that day 6 months ago when she had spent her last $5 on lunch for a stranger. That single act of kindness had set in motion a series of events that had brought love, purpose, and stability into her life in ways she never could have imagined. Her relationship with Marcus had developed slowly and naturally over the months of his father's treatment. They had shared countless conversations in hospital corridors, coffee shop visits that stretched longer than either had planned, and quiet dinners at modest restaurants where they could talk without interruption. Sarah had been careful not to let Marcus pay for everything, insisting on splitting costs or choosing places she could afford, and Marcus had learned to respect her independence while finding subtle ways to show his care and support. What had started as mutual attraction had grown into something deeper and more meaningful. Marcus had followed through on his plan to transition his career, leaving the corporate law firm to work for a nonprofit organization that provided legal advocacy for patients and families dealing with complex medical situations. The pay cut had been significant, but the fulfillment he found in his new work made the sacrifice feel like a gift rather than a loss. Sarah had supported Marcus through the career transition, offering perspective from her experience working with patients and families in the healthcare system. She had helped him understand the practical challenges that people faced when dealing with medical bureaucracy, insurance denials, and treatment decisions. Her insights had made him more effective in his new role and had reminded him why he had wanted to study law in the first place. For his part, Marcus had been present for Sarah during the stressful weeks of waiting for her exam results and job interviews. He had offered encouragement without trying to solve her problems, had listened to her fears without dismissing them, and had celebrated her successes as if they were his own. Most importantly, he had never made her feel like her financial struggles or uncertain future made her less worthy of love and respect. Now, As Sarah prepared to begin her career as a registered nurse, she realized that her relationship with Marcus had become the foundation for everything else in her life. They had learned to support each other's dreams, to communicate honestly about their fears and hopes, and to build something together that was stronger than either of them could have created alone. The engagement had happened 2 weeks earlier, in Robert's hospital room. Marcus had planned a romantic proposal in a restaurant, but when his father had suffered a setback that required emergency treatment, Marcus and Sarah had both rushed to the hospital. As they sat together in the waiting room during Robert's surgery, Marcus realized that this was the moment, not when everything was perfect and planned, but when they were facing uncertainty together and choosing to trust in their future despite the challenges. "Sarah," he had said quietly as they held hands in the uncomfortable plastic chairs, "I know this isn't the most romantic setting, but I can't wait another day to ask you something." Sarah had looked at him with surprise and growing excitement as he pulled out a simple but beautiful ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "I want to spend my life with you," Marcus had said, his voice full of emotion. "I want to face all the good times and the difficult times together. I want to support your dreams and build new dreams together. Will you marry me?" Through tears of joy, Sarah had said yes, and they had celebrated their engagement in the hospital corridor when Robert's surgery was successful and he was moved to recovery. The location hadn't mattered because they were together, and they were surrounded by the place where they had first met and where their love had grown. Robert's recovery had been remarkable. The combination of effective treatment, strong family support, and his own determination to see his son happily married had motivated him through the difficult months of chemotherapy. He was now in remission, and his doctors were optimistic about his long-term prognosis. "You saved my life that day," Robert had told Sarah recently. "Not just by buying me lunch, but by reminding me that there are still good people in the world who choose kindness over convenience. That hope helped me fight harder than I might have otherwise." Sarah had been moved by his words, but she knew that the truth was more complex. Robert and Marcus had saved her life too, not from physical illness, but from the isolation and desperation that had been threatening to overwhelm her. Their love and acceptance had given her a family, a sense of belonging, and a reminder that her struggles hadn't defined her worth as a person. Now, as she prepared to start her new job, Sarah reflected on the lessons she had learned about love and life over the past months. She had discovered that real love wasn't about finding someone who could solve all your problems or provide financial security. Real love was about finding someone who saw your potential even when you couldn't see it yourself, who supported your independence while offering partnership, and who chose to stay present during difficult times rather than waiting for life to become easier. Her relationship with Marcus had taught her that successful relationships weren't built on having the same background or circumstances, but on sharing the same values and commitment to growth. They came from different economic situations, but they both believed in the importance of meaningful work, genuine human connection, and using their opportunities to help others. They both understood what it meant to make sacrifices for family, and they both wanted to create a life together that honored the people who had supported them along the way. The wedding planning had been a reflection of their shared values. Instead of an expensive celebration, they had chosen to have a small ceremony in the hospital chapel, with Robert officiating as a licensed minister, a detail about his background that had surprised them both. The reception would be in the community center where Sarah's grandmother had taught her to sew, and they had asked guests to make donations to a scholarship fund for nursing students rather than giving traditional wedding gifts. Sarah's colleagues at the diner had become her makeshift wedding planning committee, with Mrs. Murphy insisting on catering the reception and the other waitresses organizing decorations and flowers. Marcus's former colleagues from the law firm had been surprised by his career change and unconventional wedding plans, but his new co-workers from the nonprofit had embraced Sarah immediately and offered their help with everything from legal advice about marriage contracts to recommendations for affordable photographers. The night before starting her new job, Sarah and Marcus had dinner with Robert at his apartment, which he had decorated with photos from their engagement celebration and plans for the upcoming wedding. The three of them had become a close family unit, with Robert serving as a wise advisor to both Sarah and Marcus as they navigated their relationship and career transitions. "I have something for you," Robert said to Sarah as they finished their meal. He handed her a small wrapped package that felt like a book. Sarah opened it carefully and found a leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the smooth leather. "Your grandmother's story started in a different country, but she built a life here that made your success possible," Robert said. "Your story is just beginning, and I thought you might want to record some of the important moments. Someday you might have grandchildren who will want to know about the woman who chose kindness over self-preservation and changed everything because of that choice." Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes as she understood the significance of the gift. Her grandmother had never learned to read or write in English well enough to keep a journal, but she had always told Sarah that education and documentation were important for preserving family history and lessons for future generations. "Thank you," Sarah said, embracing Robert with genuine affection. "I love you too, you know. You've become the grandfather I never had." Marcus watched this exchange with deep satisfaction. His father had always wanted a large family, but Marcus had been an only child, and there had never been grandchildren. Now Robert had gained a daughter-in-law who loved him sincerely, and soon there would hopefully be grandchildren to spoil and guide. Later that evening, as Sarah and Marcus walked through the city where they had both grown up but had never met until that day in the hospital cafeteria, they talked about their hopes for the future. Sarah would begin her nursing career, focusing on providing the kind of compassionate care that had inspired her to enter the profession. Marcus would continue his work advocating for patients and families, building on the legal skills he had developed, but applying them in service of his deeper values. They planned to save money to buy a small house where Robert could have his own space, but still be part of their daily lives. They wanted to travel together, to continue learning and growing both individually and as a couple. Most importantly, they wanted to create opportunities to help other people the way they had been helped, through mentorship, financial support for students who were struggling, and advocacy for healthcare policies that prioritized patients over profits. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't bought lunch for my father that day?" Marcus asked as they reached Sarah's apartment building. Sarah considered the question seriously. "I think we would have found each other eventually," she said. "Maybe not in the hospital cafeteria, but somewhere. I believe that people who are meant to be together find ways to connect, even when the circumstances seem impossible." "You think we were meant to be together?" Marcus asked, pulling her closer. "I think we were meant to help each other become the people we're supposed to be," Sarah replied. "Your father's illness was terrible, but it brought us together at a time when we both needed to remember what really matters in life. My financial struggles were stressful, but they taught me that love isn't about what someone can give you materially. It's about how they make you feel about yourself and your possibilities." Marcus kissed her gently, still amazed by her wisdom and emotional intelligence. "I love you, Sarah-chun. I love your strength, your compassion, your determination to help other people even when you're struggling yourself. I love the way you see the best in people and situations, even when things are difficult." "I love you too, Marcus Washington," Sarah replied. "I love your integrity, your willingness to change course when you realize you're not living according to your values, your devotion to your father, and the way you've supported my dreams without trying to take over or solve everything for me." As they said goodnight, both Sarah and Marcus felt grateful for the unexpected journey that had brought them together. They had learned that love often comes disguised as other things, as kindness to strangers, as difficult conversations about values and priorities, as willingness to be vulnerable with someone who might not understand your background or struggles. Their love story had begun with $5 and a simple choice to see another person's humanity, but it had grown into something that would last a lifetime. They had found in each other not just romantic partners, but best friends, advocates, and companions for the journey of becoming their best selves. 6 months later, Sarah Washington stood in the same hospital cafeteria where she had first met her father-in-law, but now she wore scrubs with her married name embroidered above the pocket and a wedding ring that caught the light as she checked her patient charts. She was working the day shift in oncology, providing the kind of compassionate care that had inspired her to become a nurse. Marcus often met her for lunch in the cafeteria, and they would sit at the same table where Robert had shared his meal with a struggling nursing student who had spent her last $5 on kindness. Sometimes Robert joined them, now healthy and volunteering with the hospital's patient advocacy program, sharing his experience as a cancer survivor to help other families navigate their own challenging journeys. The cafeteria staff had heard their love story, and the cashier who had been impatient with Robert that first day had become one of their biggest supporters. She had learned from watching Sarah and Marcus that everyone who came through her line was fighting battles she couldn't see, and that a little extra patience and kindness could make a significant difference in someone's day. Sarah kept the journal that Robert had given her, and she wrote in it regularly about the patients she cared for, the lessons she learned, and the ways that choosing compassion over convenience continued to create ripples of positive change in her life and the lives of others. She and Marcus had started a small scholarship fund for nursing students who were struggling financially, and they had already helped 3 students complete their education. Their love story had become a legend of sorts in the hospital, shared by staff members as evidence that good things happen to people who choose kindness even when it's difficult. But for Sarah and Marcus, the real lesson wasn't about rewards for good behavior. It was about the profound truth that human beings are designed to care for each other, and that love often finds us when we're not looking for it, but when we're simply trying to be our best selves. Years later, when they told the story to their own children, Sarah and Marcus would emphasize that their love hadn't been about finding someone perfect or solving each other's problems. It had been about recognizing something beautiful and worthy in each other, and then choosing every day to nurture and protect that recognition through all the challenges and changes that life would bring. The last $5 Sarah had spent as a single woman had bought more than lunch for a stranger, in their backgrounds and current circumstances. Sarah was struggling financially and facing an uncertain professional future, while Marcus was established and successful, even if he was questioning the direction of his career. She didn't want to become involved with someone who might feel like he needed to rescue her, and she didn't want her own insecurities about money and status to prevent her from being open to whatever might develop between them. Meanwhile, Marcus returned to his father's room with a lightness in his step that Robert noticed immediately. "Good coffee?" Robert asked with a knowing smile. "Great coffee," Marcus replied. "And even better conversation. I'm glad to hear it. Sarah is a special young woman, and I think she could be good for you." Marcus sat down beside his father's bed, ready to have the kind of honest conversation about relationships that they had never quite managed before. "I think so too, Dad. But I'm not sure how to navigate this. She's dealing with a lot of stress right now, and I don't want to add pressure to her life." "The best relationships grow naturally," Robert said wisely. "Don't try to force anything or solve all her problems for her. Just be present and honest about your feelings. If there's really something special here, it will develop in its own time." As Marcus listened to his father's advice, he realized that falling for Sarah Chun had already begun to change him in fundamental ways. For the first time in years, he was thinking about his future in terms of who he wanted to become rather than what he wanted to achieve. And the man he wanted to become was someone worthy of Sarah's respect and love, someone who chose compassion over ambition, presence over productivity, and authentic connection over professional networking. The question was whether he would have the courage to become that person, and whether Sarah would want to be part of the journey. Stability. Marcus realized that he couldn't remember the last time he had met someone who challenged him to think differently about his life and priorities. Most of the women he had dated moved in the same professional circles, shared similar backgrounds and goals. Sarah represented something different, a reminder of values and dreams he had set aside in pursuit of conventional success. "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "Then, maybe you should think about finding a way to see her again," Robert said with a smile. "Life is short, and genuine connections are rare. Don't let pride or practicality get in the way of something that could be meaningful." As Marcus sat with his father's advice, he realized that for the first time in years, he wanted something that had nothing to do with his career or financial goals. He wanted to get to know Sarah Chun better, to understand the experiences that had shaped her compassion and strength, to see if the connection he felt was something she shared. The question was whether he had the courage to find out. The elevator arrived, and as they rode down to the parking garage, Marcus found himself hoping the drive to campus would take longer than usual. There was something about Sarah that made him want to know more about her background, her goals, her story. It had been a long time since he had met someone who seemed more interested in other people than in what he could do for them professionally. When they reached his car, a sleek black BMW that represented years of hard work and financial success, he felt slightly self-conscious. Sarah didn't comment on the car, but he noticed her taking in the details with the kind of careful observation that suggested she was processing information about him and his life. As they drove through the city streets toward campus, Marcus realized that this was the most relaxed he had felt in months. Despite the serious conversation about his father's condition, despite the work emails piling up on his phone, despite all the responsibilities waiting for him back at the office, he felt present in this moment in a way that was unusual for him. He had no idea that this car ride would become the foundation of something extraordinary. He was just a successful lawyer giving a kind nursing student a ride to her exam, grateful that she had shown compassion to his father during a difficult time. He had no way of knowing that Sarah Chun was about to become the most important person in his life, or that the connection they were forming in these first conversations would soon grow into something neither of them had been looking for but both desperately needed. He had bought for him with her last $5, and she felt something warm and healing spread through her chest. Maybe her grandmother had been right about taking care of others being the same as taking care of yourself. "I would love to join you for lunch, Mr. Washington," she said. As they sat down together, Sarah had no idea that this simple act of kindness would become the foundation for something extraordinary. She was just a tired nursing student making a choice to be human in a moment when the world felt inhuman. She had no way of knowing that the man across from her would soon become one of the most important people in her life, or that the son he had never mentioned was about to walk through the cafeteria doors and change everything she thought she knew about love and destiny.